Good morning, St. Thomas.
Good morning.
The gospel lesson this morning is one of the most powerful stories in the gospel, that of the Transfiguration of Christ. There are two parts to this gospel story. One is the actual Transfiguration experience, and the other, a day later, of its effects. If you will, the actual Transfiguration. The painting, The Transfiguration, is one of the most iconic artistic depictions in the Christian church, with Jesus surrounded by images of disciples with lights and clouds representing the glory and presence of God. You are probably familiar with this. Some of these images included in the earliest one. A beautiful mosaic of the Transfiguration found at St. Catherine's Monastery at Mount Sinai in Egypt. Let's be clear, the Transfiguration story, when Jesus is visited by Moses and Elijah, which is witnessed by the disciples Peter, John, and James, represents the supernatural and the mystical. It's about magic, if you will, but real magic, according to some theologians. Magical realism. That's magic and the real working together at the same time. Think about it as another example where the word binary, real versus unreal, is too simplistic and is not capable of explaining and making sense. We probably understand the supernatural because we have been exposed to this concept all of our lives, including stories of ghosts, haints, and superstitions, dreams, telekinetics, energy, and mysticism. May the force be with you. So let's not get too rational and scientific that we totally dismiss the magical. I know for sure you believe in black girl magic, but if you don't, just ask Michelle Obama. Quickly, let me say something about Howard Thurman, my favorite theologian and mystic, who believed in divine magic. Thurman was an activist, progressive mystic, a universalist who experienced God in non-human forms, like flowers, trees, the earth, the sea, and the sky. He believed that the world is moved by a spirit within, by which all of us live and move and have our beings. His mysticism and magic embody individual responses to a personal encounter with God within one's own soul. According to Thurman, such a response is total, affecting the inner quality of life and its outward expression as its own manifestation. It is transfiguring. That's what he's saying. This is why the story of the Transfiguration is so powerful, yet often misunderstood. First, Transfiguration simply means to metamorphosize, or metamorphotha, which is Greek. Like a caterpillar, which transforms into a beautiful butterfly. Transfigured means to be changed, radically changed or shifted, like a shapeshifter in folklore. It is the ability of a being or a creature to transform its physical form or shape from one thing to another. Usually we think about the Transfiguration mostly affecting the one who's experiencing it, like Jesus in this story. However, the Transfiguration is not only about Jesus, it is also about those around him, like Peter, John, and James, and those who will be ministered to by Jesus when he returns to the people. In this case, it is clear that Jesus is the primary beneficiary of this Transfiguration experience. He directly draws on the strength of Moses and Elijah, and also the presence and power of God. Like Moses and Elijah are elders who have gone on before in the struggle for freedom, liberation, and justice. Moses and Elijah are spiritual and godly legends. Their appearance in the Transfiguration is not a biblical surprise. From Scripture, we understand some people have left the earth without dying. This was true for Elijah. The story recorded in 2 Kings tell us unmistakably that Elijah was taken to heaven without first dying. He was taken up in a whirlwind into heaven. Moses, on the other hand, died in the wilderness before the Israelite people entered into the promised land. The story of his death, as recorded in Deuteronomy 34, reveals something magical. God buried Moses. None of the Israelites ever knew of his gravesite. According to Old Testament scholars, this is the first suggestion that something special awaited Moses after death. Clearly, their lives and contributions serve as a source of motivation and a connection to the divine. So it is not difficult to imagine these spiritual elders having such an enduring impact on Jesus. Moses represented the Jewish law. Elijah represented the Jewish prophets. So when God's voice from heaven said in reference to Jesus, "Listen to him," that indicated that the law and the prophets must now give way to Jesus, who will replace the old way with the new way. In short, Jesus is the completion of the law and the fulfillment of the prophecies in the Old Testament. From the gospel story of the Transfiguration, I'm actually more interested in how the disciples experienced the magical moment. How did these affect their thinking, their work, and their journey? Was it motivating and inspiring? I think the answer is yes, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Without a doubt, the disciples were transfixed and awestruck by the appearance of Moses and Elijah, but even more so about their witness to the glory of God. They are allowed to see Jesus temporarily shed his earthly form and take on his divinity. God's voice then pierced the sky, saying God was well pleased with Jesus, the Son. This magical moment had to be transformative. They wanted to just linger with Moses and Elijah and bask in the glory of God's presence. But soon, Jesus demanded them to go back to their normal lives. When they returned, the effects of this profound experience is silence, a reflective quiet in their effort to understand what really happened to Jesus. In some ways, it might have been a slight disbelief in their belief. This silence was obvious when they met a boy who was possessed by an evil spirit. The boy's father begged the disciples for help in casting out this spirit, but they stood silent and helpless. Jesus calls them out and criticized their unfaithfulness, though. "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you?" He was disgusted and basically said, "Get out of my way and let me do this thing." It was less important that Jesus healed the boy and exorcised the demonic spirit. Yes, all were astounded at the greatness of Jesus in the act. But what about the followers of Jesus, his disciples, Peter, John, and James? Where was their act of power and faith in God's power? Remember, they were eye and ear witnesses to the voice and presence of God and the divinity of Christ. However, for some reason, between the Transfiguration and the return to their lives in the city, the power of God's magic appears to have fallen silent and impotent. Peter, John, and James experienced the Transfiguration, or the transfigured Jesus, and in that moment were elevated in their spirit and worship. But a transfiguration, a metamorphosis, should go beyond that Jesus moment on the mountain and extend to our daily lives, our work, our community, our relationships, and worship. Without a doubt, when we meet a transfigured Jesus, our lives are radically shifted, transfigured and transformed to a higher form of ourselves and our own possibilities. So let us not keep silent and keep still when we are needed to transform, even reconfigure the world around us. We we have God's magic and power.